Today we're here to talk about the proxy war of Cuba. On this map you see that the proxy war was versus Russia and the US, and Cuba is off the coast of Florida. On the US side, John F. Kennedy was the President of the United States. Then on the USSR side, you had Fidel Castro, who in 1959 overthrew the Cuban dictator and set up a totalitarian regime in Cuba. In 1955, Khrushchev became the new leader of the Soviet Union, and during the War of Cuba, he began to place missiles in Cuba.
The role of the U.S. was So in 1959, when Fidel Castro overthrew the previous Cuban dictator and had set up a totalitarian regime, the USSR supported Fidel Castro. President John F. Kennedy thought that it was a threat that having a USSR-supported country so close to the U.S. was a bad thing. He also was afraid that if the U.S. were to move against Cuba, or against Castro, then the Soviets would retaliate by trying to take Berlin. To solve this problem, Kennedy decided to approve the CIA's plan in hopes of causing a revolt against Castro without the U.S. actually stepping on Cuban territory. The plan was to have exiled Cuban fighters to invade through the Bay of Pigs. However, this plan failed because the troops that were sent in were either killed or surrendered and were captured. Because the Soviets had the upper hand, some of their nuclear weaponry was moved and stationed into Turkey. This forced the U.S. to promise not to invade Cuba if they removed their nuclear bases from Cuba and send them back home.
So the role of the USSR. In 1959, a man named Fidel Castro overthrew the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista and set up a Soviet-supported totalitarian regime in Cuba. The result was the setup of the two superpowers to engage in a nuclear war. As stated before, the US president feared that if they moved against Castro, then the Soviets might retaliate by moving against Berlin. The Soviets then sent advisors to Cuba, and soon Khrushchev began to place nuclear missiles in Cuba. The Soviets did this to counteract the USA's nuclear weapons in Turkey.
Some notable events in this proxy war was that the USSR agreed to return the missiles if US agreed to never invade Cuba. The realization that the world may have been destroyed influenced both sides during this war. In 1992, Soviet officer revealed that rockets armed with nuclear devices would have been used against the US if they were to invade Cuba. As a result, the US won because there were no missiles that were set off against them. But today, the Soviet Union won because Cuba is still a communist country.